Heart of Danger, Chapter 3, Arca Pharmaceuticals Headquarters, San Francisco. His private cell buzzed. Dr. Charles Lee, head of research, frowned. It was late and he was expecting the results of the Africa trial. Nobody should be calling at this late hour. He checked the number, set the phone in its dock, and pressed the icon for hologram. The shaved bullet head of his chief of security at the Millen lab, Cal Baring, appeared in 3D. Baring was scowling ferociously, but then he usually did. Yes, Baring. Lee continued scrolling through research data. The one's instinct was to address a hologram because it was so lifelike it wasn't necessary. What is it? It's about Dr. Young, sir. That caught Lee's attention. He looked up from the screen, frowning. What about her? Dr. Catherine Young was crucial to the Warrior program. She was a brilliant researcher. If she were in Germany, she'd be Frau Doctor, the double PhD in biology and neuroscience, and an MD. Though incredibly smart in terms of scientific research, she also seemed to be clueless in terms of the broader picture, focusing narrowly on the dementing patients they sent to her, not questioning how they got that way, which was perfect. Unlike Roger Bryson in the Cambridge lab, his questions had become irritating, then dangerous. He deserved to die in the fire. He had become much too curious and insistent. The ironic thing was that he really had come up with a cancer vaccine, the formula for which was now safely in a vault in the Ministry of Science in Beijing. A canister of the active vaccine had been removed from the Cambridge lab just before the Ghost Stop strike and taken to Beijing by diplomatic pouch. All the members of the Politburo had been vaccinated. Later, when the world was theirs for the taking, the vaccine would be offered to all ethnic Chinese. Lee had been born Cheng-Li 38 years ago on the outskirts of Beijing. His father was a doctor, but he wanted to secure a future for his only son, so they immigrated to San Francisco with his paternal grandfather when Lee was 7. His father's medical degree wasn't recognized, so he drove a taxi. Stupid man. His father had died old, before his time, having done menial labor for 30 years. For what? So Lee could become an American. He became an American, all right. In a city like San Francisco, with its fusion population, he fit right in. He learned perfect English, played basketball in high school, liked jazz, went to Stanford on a scholarship. His parents were ecstatic. But his yaya, his grandfather, a noted scholar who had unwillingly followed his son to America, made sure Lee kept his Mandarin up, made sure his calligraphy was perfect, filled his head with tales of the once powerful Middle Kingdom. Lee's father was too busy, too tired to notice or even to care that his son was faking loving the American dream. Because he was. By the time he was 17, already a sophomore neurobiology student at Stanford, he realized the enormous mistake his father had made, because America was the past and China was the future. His sophomore year, the OECD officially announced that the Chinese economy was bigger than the American economy, and growing as the American economy was not. It was clear all around him. Americans were poor and getting poorer. It had lost its faith in itself and was hunkered down, hoping the new winds blowing over the world would pass soon. But that was not the nature of the winds of change. Lee had kept in touch with old school friends back in China, many of whom were now in positions of power. One in particular, Ch was now right-hand man to the Minister of Defense. Lee and Yu have been working on the plan for 4 years now, ever since Lee realized the potential of the Warrior Project. Yu was his conduit to the Ministry of Defense via encrypted, very long-wave propagation channels. The NSA was too good for them to be able to entrust the plan to satellite transmission. They communicated through the Earth itself as they built the Warrior Project from the ground up. Lee had thought it might take 100 years for China to rule the world, which would have been fine. China had always taken the long view. America operated on a quarterly basis. 3 months was a ridiculous time horizon. China operated on a century basis. But with Warrior, China could take over the world in 1 short year. And Lee would return triumphantly to the homeland he had never forgotten, a hero and a powerful man. The man who had been the ultimate weapon in China's hands. He, Charles Lee, was going to make history. Super soldiers, the dream of every military force since time began. Smarter, faster, tougher. The Americans had a comic book hero for this, Captain America, but Lee and Yu were going to create one for real, Captain China. So far, everything was on track, with the exception of the Cambridge lab and General Clancy Flynn had taken care of that. Things were going well, though. Some technical problems remained, but all in all, the plan was coming to fruition along the scheduled timeline. The Cambridge lab fiasco had yielded some advantages, however. 3 gifted soldiers, true warriors, to experiment on. 3 men he could do anything to, study as he wished. It was perfect terrain for testing their protocols. Artificially dement them, bring them back, then harvest their brains and analyze the neurological tissue. Testing on warriors would have proved impossible if they were of sound mind and body, but they'd been reduced to physical and mental shells and were harmless. He focused again on what Bering had said. What about Dr. Young? Dr. Young didn't show up for work, sir. We were only informed an hour ago. Did she call in sick? Lee asked Bering. No, sir, and she's not home. We checked. Lee felt the faintest prickle of unease. Dr. Young was right in the middle of the analyses of the beta doses. She was a dedicated researcher. Not showing up for work was so unusual as to warrant an alarm. She had no idea what she was really working on, but if she ever got the big picture, as Dr. Bryson had, she would be very dangerous. But Bryson had been skeptical by nature, which Young was not. She might not be answering the doorbell. When I say not home, sir, I mean just that. We scanned the house. There was no one inside. The chill grew stronger. This was very unlike Dr. Young. Did you track her cell? Bering's voice grew cold. His words were staccato. Yes, sir. Not transmitting. This had been a bone of contention. Bering wanted to inject microtracers into every single researcher on the Milan campus, but Lee had turned the request down. There was massive IQ on site. All it would take was for one researcher to figure it out, and the news would spread, and there would be hell to pay. Lee made sure the scientists working at the Milan facility saw the project only through straws, but they were very bright men and women and were perfectly capable of putting 2 and 2 together. That was why the average stay at Milan was 6 months. An exception had been made for Catherine Young because Lee felt her work shouldn't be interrupted, and it would take another scientist 6 months just to get caught up to speed. Young was tasked with making an fMRI map of the altered minds, creating a baseline for further research. Her work had to remain confidential, which is why Lee had planned on having Bering terminate her once the map was complete, instead of transferring her. Young knew a lot, more than enough to create trouble. He kept her under surveillance. Bering's surveillance had been very tight in the beginning, but nothing had shown up, and they decided they could take it down a notch or two. And now she'd slipped through their net. What about her car? Not transmitting, transponder dead. Bering's lips clamped closed in disapproval. Bering had petitioned to put trackers in staff cars too, but most of the staff had electric cars, which would soon become mandatory in California anyway. All cars were run by microchips, which were hackable with just a little effort. Their lead definitely ruled against Bering. An external tracker on a car would be a dead giveaway that something was wrong, particularly when any car could be hacked as long as it was running. All e-cars had transponders which allowed them to send out an emergency signal. So Catherine Young's car was somewhere out there, but not running, and the transponder was dead. Lee drummed his fingers on the console once. It was all he allowed himself. No one knew better than he the importance of keeping body language serene. Did you check the cameras in the lab? Yes, sir. Even in the hologram, Lee could see Bering's color change, face becoming ruddy, of course. Anything untoward happen yesterday? It didn't seem so, sir. Bering's jaw muscles tightened as if he'd been questioned. Then again, what would Bering know? He wasn't a scientist. He couldn't follow any of the researchers' work. Did she seem agitated in any way? Did she do anything different? Lee watched Bering's disembodied head. Even just a few years ago, there was half a second's delay in holographic telephony, sometimes making conversations surreal. But ARCA had state-of-the-art technology, and Bering reacted in real time. No, sir. Who was she working on yesterday? Number 9, sir, Bering replied. Lee felt that prickle of coldness once more. Bering had no idea who 9 was. It was a good thing that Captain Ward had always worked in the shadows. Only a handful of people were familiar with his spectacular military career. Bering was ex-military, but he came from infantry. What Ward did had always been above Bering's pay grade. This was nothing, and yet Catherine Young disappearing after working on Ward was not good. Ward was the key. Lee was sure of it. They were so close, so very close. SL-57 hadn't worked, but each successive iteration brought them closer to their goal. A virus-borne cocktail of hormones and chemical stimulants to neurotransmitters and muscle enhancers was being fine-tuned. Currently, the protocol to enhance intelligence and speed of reflexes caused fulminating dementia in most patients, but they were closer to understanding the cause and reversing the effect. SL-58 was being tested, right now in fact. It had been a top-secret government project known by the harmless name of Strategic Leadership, that Lee had run under the orders of General Clancy Flynn. The money coming from a black fund Flynn controlled. Flynn was retired now, CEO of a private security company. Lee knew that Flynn wanted to create an unstoppable private army via SL. Flynn was funneling private money into Arca's research at the Milan labs. He was pumping close to $10 million a year into Lee's project. Flynn's projections were of $1 billion profit the first year, and double that within 3 years once the project was viable. But Lee had no intention of letting Flynn get his hands on SL once it was perfected. Millions of vials of the first effective doses were going straight to the People's Republic of China to be manufactured on an industrial scale and administered systematically to the 7 million troops and the 40 million reserve troops of the PLA. It would become literally unstoppable. China would be unstoppable. When the secret program began 7 years before, it had been given the anodyne and generic name of SL for strategic leadership, but Lee knew that SL stood for Shen Li, warrior. He'd hoped, for symmetry's sake, that the brain of a warrior would give him and his country the means to conquer the world. It would be fitting. Captain Lucius Ward was one of the best warriors America had ever produced. But perhaps it was not to be. He would wait for another day or two for Dr. Young to show up. If she didn't, he would terminate the captain and autopsy his brain and move on. The formula was close. China's time was almost here. In a few hours, he'd be watching test results of a beta version that just might be the right formula. If it worked, he was months away from his goal, a triumphant China. Mount Blue. Well, what the fuck do we know about her, besides the fact that she's smart and enjoys really good tacos? Nick Ross asked. His dark, hard face was as expressionless as Mac's own. They were in Mac's study, watching Catherine Young on his 3D monitors. Well, we know she's a babe, John said cheerfully. What? He opened up his hands when Mac and Nick turned to him. She is a babe. That hair, those eyes, those boobs. John, Nick let out a long breath. An attempt at restraint. No one would believe that John Ryan could be anything but surfer dude. Sunstreak blonde hair, laid back attitude, a weakness for truly garish Hawaiian shirts and women. He was as lethal as Mac or Nick, but it didn't show. Men instinctively moved out of Mac's way and out of Nick's way, but they always underestimated John and were always really sorry afterwards, if they live long enough to be sorry. She says she's treating the captain, Mac reminded them quietly. And it was like a large, dark stone dropping into a pond. He's alive and he's close, according to her. He's not sipping tropical drinks in Bali, and he's not living upriver in the Mekong, and he's not in Tajikistan. Some of their favorite speculations, because Lucius was intimately familiar with those places, like he was intimately familiar with Colombia, Sierra Leone, and the more remote islands of Indonesia. If it was tough and remote, Lucius knew it. There are speculations that he might be in Bali with a couple of women, and a mansion had been tinged with bitterness because that new deluxe life would have been bought with their lives. Hot or not, we're going to have to get more intel from her. She's lying about the captain, but she knows something and we're going to have to find out what. Nick's voice was low. He looked each of them in the eye, by whatever means possible. Though I wouldn't advise trying to fuck it out of her. No time for it, not even for you, John. John breathed out a sigh of regret. None of them was capable of hurting a woman, but John had seduced his share of intel out of women. Not Mac. Women didn't fall for Mac. Women didn't even like looking at him. One look at his face and they either ran screaming or decided he was good for one thing and one thing only, a fuck. After which they were gone. Fine by him. He'd been born ugly, with big irregular features. An opponent who'd had a boot knife and slashed his face open with it had scarred one side of his face, and then the arc of fire that had burned the other side of his face had taken care of the rest. Most people flinched when they saw him the first time. They avoided looking at him as if looking at him could cause them harm. Like that Greek lady with the snakes for hair who turned anyone who looked at her to stone. He'd had a hard life and it was reflected in his face. Mac didn't give a shit. In the military, he did what he had to do and he did it well. And what he looked like didn't make any difference at all to the outcome. The only time he thought about it was when he was undercover, because he was memorable. Not in a good way. Mac might have better chances than I would, John said, waggling his eyebrows with that handsome mug of his. Cut it out, Mac growled. Didn't have time for this. No, dude, I mean it. John suddenly turned serious. The expression odd on his good-looking face. Mac had watched him hosing opponents with his charm. Wielding that bright and merry smile while slipping in the knife. His face wasn't made for seriousness. Seeing him so sober and serious was strange. The chick likes you. Mac didn't surprise easily, but he felt his jaw unhinge slightly, then snapped it closed. What the fuck are you talking about? The chick? John insisted. The lady doctor? The one you just spent an hour interrogating? Remember her? The one we're watching now? Can it, John? Nick's voice was low with menace. She digs you, John continued as if Nick hadn't spoken. Man, she looked at you like you were smoking hot. Mac made a sound of exasperation. John liked to razz on him, but now wasn't the time. On the monitor, the woman had finished the juice drink and was polishing off the last of the peach pie. And she must have an amazing metabolism to eat like that and stay so slender. Either that or she'd been starving. At the thought, a slight worm of unease went through him. He was hard, yeah, but he wasn't cruel. It wasn't a happy thought that she might have been hungry while he was interrogating her. Starving a woman? Well, that officially made him a prick. He was a badass, but not a prick. Shit, look at that chick eat, John said. Nice manners, but she's packing this stuff away. She was hungry, Max said curtly. Yeah, John said, for you. Fuck off, John. Nick gave John's shoulder a sharp blow. We don't have time for this. The fuck is wrong with you? Hey man, I'm serious. Wait. Let me show you what I mean. John reached over and touched the screen, dragging his index finger from right to left, rewinding. There it is. The moment Mac takes her hood off. All three men turned to the monitor, though Mac didn't know what the hell he was looking for. He'd been there and hadn't noticed anything. All three watched as Mac held open the door and ushered a hooded Catherine in with a hand to the small of her back. Now that he remembered vividly. Sleek muscles, narrow waist, some really nice smell as she walked past him. He rarely touched women except for sex. It had felt nice, and he'd squashed the thought immediately. Until she convinced him otherwise, this woman was the enemy. There, John shouted and tapped the screen to freeze it. Side note, it's like when in Pitch Perfect when they do the like the first night when they choose the girls who are gonna be on the team, and like right before they drink the wine and stuff, and they all have hoods on their head. When they take off Becca's hood, like when I read this part of the book, it reminds me of that scene in the movie. Anyway. There, John shouted and tapped the screen to freeze it. What? Nick asked, baffled. Mac frowned and leaned closer to the monitor, trying to figure out what John saw. He looked at the tableau, his frozen self with the hood in his hand, holding it high, having whipped it off the woman's head, her hair gently raised from the friction with the hood, forming a halo around her head. She was looking straight at him, and the screen save caught that second in which she had a first glimpse of his face. Dispassionately, Mac had to recognize that the woman was truly beautiful, one of the most beautiful women he'd ever seen. Gorgeous, light gray eyes, high cheekbones, full mouth. It was a bone-deep beauty, the kind that could never fade. She'd be a gorgeous centenarian. Whatever makeup she might have started the day with was long gone, though. It wasn't a face that needed enhancement. Could have done with some color, though. She was white as ice. Other than that, what wasn't he seeing? What? Mac echoed. Her face, damn it. John tapped the screen, his finger making a little thud in the glass right over the image of her face. Look at it. Mac and Nick stared at the screen, then at each other. What the fuck? John gave a snort of disgust. Jesus. Observation skills 0, both of you. You know what I'm seeing? Nothing. That's what I'm seeing. Mac and Nick glanced at each other again. Mac shrugged. Hell if I know what he's talking about. She's not afraid, you asshole, John shouted. I defy any human being, let alone a woman, who is by all accounts a geek and is certainly not an operator, to be kidnapped, taken somewhere unknown, have the hood whipped off unexpectedly, and see your face and not shit herself with fright. Come on, you know what you look like. Heaven knows you use it often enough to intimidate. It's not working with her. Look, damn it. Mac looked. The screenshot showed Mac with his war face on, while Catherine Young looked straight up at him. Her face showed exhaustion, vulnerability, tiredness, but not fear. No fear at all. Dude, John turned to Mac, you're terrifying. I know you, and know you're one of the good guys, but shit, sometimes you scare me. Think about it. She's not scared. She's not taken by surprise by your ugly, scarred mug, so Either she already knows what you look like, or she falls into instant love. And I opt for door number 1. He's got a point, Mac, Nick said slowly, eyes riveted to the screen. No offense, but how can she see you suddenly and not run screaming? Particularly since basically she's your prisoner? Does she know you? That one Mac could answer. Never seen her before in my life. Then there's something we're not seeing, not understanding. The 3 men were silent. She saw a photo of you somewhere, Nick said slowly. That's the only thing I can think of. That's why she was prepared. Negative, Mac shot back sharply. We're fucking ghosts. No way. Lucius had ruthlessly destroyed all documentary evidence of their existence in and out of the military. And when the captain did something, he did it thoroughly. Unless, Sean began, a frown of concentration between his blonde eyebrows. Unless, well, crazy as it sounds, she's saying the captain sent her. He held up a hand. Wait, I'm not saying she was sent by Lucius. I'm just saying she's saying Lucius sent her. And, well, just about the only explanation I can come up with for her reaction when she sees you for the first time is, Lucius described me to her. Mac kept his voice flat. She knew what I looked like because Lucius told her what I looked like, which would mean that she's right. Lucius is in Palo Alto and in trouble. He gritted his jaw muscles looking at his teammates, Code Delta. The meal was so good it might even be worth getting off afterwards. Catherine would have sworn her stomach was so knotted up she would barely be able to choke down a few bites. But at the mere smell of the food, her stomach simply opened up like a door. Maybe it was the animal in her, she thought, that wanted to live, the lizard part of her brain waking up, pushing for survival. She'd spent her childhood and teen years suppressing the lizard brain, believing her gift came from the unconscious. She never let herself be swayed by emotion, by need, ever. And yet the scientist in her knew that was nonsense. Whatever it was that allowed her to read emotions, it wasn't a thing that could be exorcised from her life. Could be suppressed for a while, sure. She should know because she was queen of suppression. But when it came roaring back, it was so strong it was uncontrollable. Maybe that was why she had reacted so very strongly tonight to Edward Domino, alias Lucius Ward. He'd come into her life after a long period of repression. She'd immersed herself in her studies, cut herself off from most human relations, certainly from anyone who could evoke an emotional or sexual reaction, and thought she'd rid herself of her dragon. But the dragon had come swooping back in on black and gold wings, breathing fire. Her gift hadn't become weaker through suppression, it had become stronger. The clearest reading she'd ever had in her life from another human being had been from patient number 9, Lucius Ward. Crystal clear, so specific it had been as if she'd been handed written instructions for use. All her other readings had been mostly vague and cloudy. She could pick up on the major emotions, fear, hatred, hidden love, shame, ambition, like picking up on the loud bits of a symphony. Other emotions underneath had been harder to catch or to interpret. This was something far from the reassuring pilasters of science holding up her world. This was something else. The fact that she was here had been propelled here by forces beyond her control was a function of pure instinct. Instinct told her to eat and drink, and she did. The instant she drained the last of that amazing juice, feeling a billion vitamins coursing through her system, the door whooshed open again, and she turned to watch the big man in black enter the room. He walked over to the other chair and sat down. For the first time, Catherine noticed how he moved. He was huge, but moved with enormous grace like an athlete. He obviously was an athlete, among other things. He had the body of an outsized linebacker, bulging muscles evident even under the clothes. He'd shed the tough, impenetrable outerwear like an exoskeleton, and was now dressed in a black sweatshirt, black jeans, black combat boots. He had pulled up the sleeves of his sweatshirt, showing strong, muscled forearms with highly raised veins. His body had increased the veins to pump more oxygen into the muscles, an automatic bodily response that couldn't be faked and that spoke of hours and hours of working out or fighting. Because he was a warrior, not an athlete. The weapons at his hips showed her that. He sat down in front of her and looked at her, dark eyes unblinking. There was a slight abatement of the heavy waves of suspicion that had enveloped him like smoke. Though he was far from welcoming or even trusting, there was an overt hostility. "Thank you for the food," she said politely. He dipped his head. "You're welcome." The deep, low voice reverberated in the room. "I was hungrier than I thought." Maybe she could trick him and he'd answer, "I noticed." She was absolutely positive there was a camera in the room, though it was invisible. Nowadays, vidcams were in patches slapped on walls and doorknobs and windowsills. They'd have watched her every move. Certainly she was being watched right now. But she underestimated him. He didn't so much as flicker an eyelash. "Okay, try another tack." "I'm surprised you fed me." His eyes narrowed. "I didn't want to starve you to death. All I want is for you to be gone." "I understand that." Catherine leaned forward on her forearms. "I also understand that I'm eventually going to end up several hundred miles from here with a headache and no memory whatsoever of the past 24 hours. Or maybe even 48 hours, depending on the dose of leth. My company invented it. In-house we call it MIB, for Men in Black. Only it's not a light that shines in your eyes, it's drops in a glass. So I'd like to thank you for not MIBing the carrot and apple juice, because I have some more things to say before you do." Aha. Anyone less adept than she was at reading body language would have missed it, because he didn't move a muscle except for an involuntary twitch of the sternocleidomastoid muscle in his right jaw. Not all the training in the world could stop fast twitch muscles taken by surprise. Still, it was very, very good. She was better. Patient 9 didn't say so in so many words. Actually, he hadn't said it in any words, just vague images of shadowy men. But I think that there are several of you here, 2, maybe 3 others like you, somehow friends of his. Again, he didn't move a muscle, but a coldness crept over his features. not friends of his. Silence.